even still, it just makes so little sense to me. I can't understand what they were thinking.
Welcome to another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks. The first round of the NFL draft is in the books and a lot of different takeaways. He's Vaz, I'm Jason, and we're going to go over just some of our biggest takeaways from the draft. There weren't a lot of surprises, but there certainly was one big one, which we'll get into in a moment. But Vaz, let's just start off with the draft in itself as a general thing. How did you enjoy it this year compared to other years?
I love the draft every year, like, and this year especially. I kind of just, more than years past, I kind of just sat back with my popcorn and tried to enjoy the draft as much as possible. Tried to like not think about my fantasy teams and just like enjoy the draft this time around. And there were a few wow moments for me that I really like were really unexpected. So I really enjoyed it this year.
All right. I think without a doubt, the biggest wow moment had to have been Michael Penix Jr. being taken from Atlanta with the 8th overall selection. There were a little bit of hints of it in the pre-draft show. Ian Rappaport brought it up that it was a possibility, but when it actually happened, I clearly thought that was the most surprising thing that happened. Is that safe to say for you too?
Oh, without question. Like, even still, it just makes so little sense to me. I can't understand what they were thinking. Like, they just gave Cousins $180 million. They seem to be like ready to like push all in to compete this year. And then they draft a quarterback for, 3 years in the future. Like, I just don't understand it like at all. And I'm glad I'm not a Falcons fan right now. But you know what? They've been searching for a quarterback for a long time since Matt Ryan, I guess. And I guess they just want to make sure that they have a guy in place for the future.
Couple of things that puzzled me with it because first off, he's one of the older quarterbacks. So it's not like, they've got this guy that they're saving for 3 years down the road, like Jordan Love, because if they were to, he'd be like 28, 29 by the time he actually started. So, I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at, but Cousins has a lot of guaranteed money as well. So it really does seem puzzling from a fantasy perspective when you look at this, because they took him 8th overall. Does it up his value a lot, or because he's stuck behind Cousins I mean, who's affected more by this, do you think, Penix or Cousins?
Yeah, you know what? Okay, let me just touch on the first part first. Like, I remember when Love was selected, in the late in the first round, uh, and even when Rodgers was selected late in the first round, these like puzzling draft picks, that everyone's like, why did they do that? Why did they do that? But these were late first round picks where you're not risking as much. Penix was taken 8th overall with a lot of good players on the board. So like, this is super puzzling. Like, even when Love was taken at that point, like, I didn't really get it. But 8th overall is really, really shocking. And then in terms of value, your second question there, it's really tough for me because I think like before the draft, I had him like going early second round, and I think you have to move him up to like late first round now. Just based on draft capital, and the landing spot is great. Like, when he's obviously going to be the starter there at some point, probably 2 or 3 years down the road, and the weapons are elite, and the draft capital is elite. So, I mean, you got to move him up. I don't think you move him up drastically. Like, I don't think you move him up ahead of Knicks, because Knicks is going to start probably from day one. So I don't think you can move him up to like, top 10. But I think as soon as, reaching the end of the first round, early second round is probably where I see Penix going in most rookie drafts.
Okay, then part two of that question becomes, how does this affect Cousins? Does he take a big hit on this, or slight hit?
I don't think so. I don't think so because, I don't think he takes a hit because he's still like a starting caliber quarterback no matter what. Like, he's a good player. So if I think they've paid him a lot of money, they're going to play him for at least the next 2 years. And then, like, let's say after 2 years they decide they want to move over to Penix, they're going to probably trade Cousins to somewhere else, somebody that wants a quarterback. So I don't think Cousins takes a hit. I think he'll be a long-term answer at quarterback for fantasy, and maybe because he's not going to be in Atlanta long term, maybe he takes a slight hit, but it's ever so slight in my mind.
Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the Chargers because I think it was a bit of a surprise. There were some, possibilities of course, Harbaugh wanting to be a run-heavy team and therefore going offensive line, but a lot of people in their various expert mock drafts had them taking a wide receiver. So the fact that the Chargers do not take a wide receiver, instead fortifying their offensive line, I mean, the obvious thing has to be that Herbert's going to be taking a little bit of a hit with that.
Hmm. So I think, the Chargers clearly like they showed their hand here, right? It's clear what their personality is going to be. They're going to be like a smash mouth team, right? And I think everybody had Neighbors as like the top ranked prospect over Joe Alt, almost everybody. So they bypassed, the superior player for the lineman who is going to help them, pound the rock. So I think, yeah, Justin Herbert takes a massive hit here. And I didn't like him before this, but I like him even less now. They're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball a lot, and they don't have the receiving options. I'm sure they're going to address receiver later at some point in round two, but you know what? Whoever they grab in round two, whether it be like McConkey or Adonai Mitchell, they're not Malik Neighbors. So, Herbert takes a massive hit here. He's not getting without question, wide receiver one. And as I said, the Chargers have shown their hand. They want to run the ball. They want to take the ball out of Herbert's hand. They want to make it, they want to slow the game down. They want to bleed the clock. So, yeah, Herbert slides down my rankings. I don't see him finishing as anything better than like a low end QB1 in fantasy.
Yeah, I think in a previous video, we had talked about the comparison with Herbert and Kyler Murray. And you said that you would take Kyler Murray ahead of Herbert. I argued that, no, I think I would still take Herbert over Murray. But I think based on what happened in the first round of this draft, I would have to agree. I think clearly you have to put Kyler ahead of Herbert just because of
Yeah.
the whole Harbaugh factor. Because Harbaugh, like you mentioned, how many times is Herbert going to be throwing the ball in an average game? And his attempts clearly are going to take a hit. And then the
Yeah.
success rate of those passes as well, based on the weapons that he has. I shouldn't say completely shocked, but at the same time, if I don't have Herbert in any of my leagues, but if I were to have him, if I did have him, I would have been very, very disappointed.
No, for sure.
Let's talk about Minnesota and Denver, both getting the quarterbacks that they were trying to get. Nix was connected to Denver quite a bit. McCarthy
Mhm.
was connected to Minnesota quite a bit. Both teams got their guys and didn't have to pay extra to move up to get. They were able to get them with their natural picks. I get Minnesota moved up, okay, like one pick, right? But they didn't have to give up anything major to get McCarthy. So what are your takeaways on that the smoke screen worked, I guess you could say?
Well, my takeaway for Minnesota grabbing McCarthy is that they didn't give up a lot to move up that one spot, but
Yeah.
in moving up that one spot, they showed us that that's their guy. They got a little bit nervous and they're like, "Well, we have to go get him. Like we have to go get him." So they showed everybody that they really wanted JJ McCarthy. And then I think in that sense, you can feel confident drafting him in rookie drafts because he went to the most elite landing spot and that was their guy. They wanted him. They told everybody that. They weren't like we're settling for JJ McCarthy. They went up and they got him. So, yeah, like for me in my personal rankings, which we'll get to in a later video, he's moving ahead of Drake May just because the landing spot is so elite and he's got the draft capital now, a top 10 NFL draft pick. So, I love it for JJ McCarthy. And I love it for all the Minnesota Vikings pass catchers.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Let's talk about Bowers going
Oh,
to
Bo
the
Nix.
or
Let's not skip on Bo
okay,
Nix.
yeah, yep. Sorry, let's talk about Knicks first
Yeah.
to Denver.
And if you have anything to add, feel free. But
Yep.
in terms of Bo Nix, like I love it as well. Like, listen, Sean Payton is an elite coach, right? He's a fantastic offensive mind. They got their guy too. That's clear. They drafted him high. They could have tried to move back and add a little bit of draft capital if they wanted to, but they didn't. They stayed right there. They grabbed Bo Nix, and he's the best quarterback on their roster. So he's probably the day one starter. I'd imagine he is. And people will say, oh, he doesn't have the weapons and whatnot. But you know what? He's got Sean Payton. He's got a good run game. He's got a decent team. I think it's a pretty good landing spot for a rookie quarterback, and he's moving up my rankings as well. So I love the spot for Bo Nix. I love the draft capital for Bo Nix. So yeah, I love this for Bo Nix.
Yeah, so clearly the acquisitions of Zach Wilson and Sam Darnold, respectively, um, this hurts their value because I think we knew that both teams were going to try to draft a quarterback, but until they actually do, you're still holding on to a little bit of hope. But that hope essentially is washed away with how much capital that, like you mentioned, these teams spent on their guys.
I mean, me personally, I had no hope for them. They had no value in my mind already. But yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, yeah, they're dead. They're droppable now in fantasy football.
And then let's talk about the Raiders a bit because when we'll get to Bowers, like I mentioned, but at the same time, a couple of guys there in O'Connell and
Minshew.
Gardner Minshew, they both survive in terms of their team not taking a quarterback.
Yeah, huge winners there. I'd imagine that Gardner Minshew ends up the starter there. They gave him quite a bit of money, so huge win for Gardner Minshew, and they added Brock Bowers, so huge for Gardner Minshew, big winner, right? And talking about Brock Bowers, if you want to get into that, I think that this was like an oof moment for me, not a wow moment, but like a damn moment because I hate this landing spot for Brock Bowers. Sucks for Michael
Michael
Mayer
Meyer,
as
yeah,
well.
or McMayer.
Yeah, so yeah, like rough spot here. I think like even for Bowers, who I'm really high on, it's a pretty crap landing spot. There's a lot of targets to go around. They've got a Michael Mayer. He's a good player. He's not. Yeah, they're not. I don't think they're replacing him. I think they're both going to be on the field quite a bit, but like they're both going to demand targets. They've got two great receivers that are going to demand targets. They don't have a great quarterback, so it's a pretty horrible landing spot for Brock Bowers, and very disappointing in my eyes.
Obviously, Michael Mayer takes a hit in his value, but
Yeah.
for Bauer landing in Las Vegas, do you drop him down your rookie rankings because of that?
I will. I'll drop him down probably one spot. I think I'll probably in a standard league take Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of him.
Okay.
Now, I can't do it for you. The inches we need are everywhere around us. What are you gonna do? Like! Subscribe! Subscribe!
Okay. And speaking of Brian Thomas Jr., he goes to Jacksonville. What did you think of his landing spot?
Yeah, for me, it's a good landing spot. Probably not an A plus landing spot, but an excellent landing spot. There's going to be a lot of targets to go around there with Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis. But Gabe Davis doesn't worry me too much. He's more of a type of receiver that's like good for this NFL team, but not so great for fantasy. Doesn't demand a lot of targets, but stretches the field. I think that Brian Thomas Jr. is probably like the number one receiver immediately. Of course, Christian Kirk is a good player, but he's more of like a underneath guy. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is more of a deep threat. So I think this is excellent for Trevor Lawrence, who's going to have a true number one receiver for a long period of time now, and they've got a lot of receiving options and I like it for both Trevor Lawrence, who can hit the long bomb, and then also for Brian Thomas Jr.
Okay. Obviously, Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be the best dynasty piece on that team for wide receivers. But let's say for redraft for the upcoming season, would you take Brian Thomas Jr. over Christian Kirk?
That's a great question. I think probably I'll let it depend on my format. So if I'm playing in a PPR league, I'd probably take Christian Kirk. I expect him to get more targets, but then maybe if I'm playing in like a half PPR type of league, maybe I'll take a chance on Brian Thomas Jr., who's more likely to hit the home run. So I think I'd probably leave it to that.
All right. And at the end of the first round, after the big four, essentially, the question was who was going to be the fifth wide receiver taken. And it was actually Xavier Worthy, and Kansas City traded up to acquire him. So you've got to love that for Worthy.
Yeah, that was another surprising moment that it was the Chiefs and Bills that struck a deal because you'd expect the Bills to grab a receiver there. So I'm thinking like the Bills are going to draft at 33 tomorrow. And I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't draft in the first round so we would know who's going there. But like if they wanted somebody bad enough like Adonai Mitchell, I expected them to grab him there. So I'm thinking maybe they're not looking that way at 33, but we'll find that out tomorrow. But Worthy to KC is amazing, right? What a landing spot. There's a lot to unpack here. I think for me, Hollywood takes a hit because I think now we know that this is probably a 1 year deal for Hollywood. I think Xavier Worthy is going to be that deep threat receiver for the Chiefs for the long term, right? So great landing spot for Worthy. He's got Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, who's gonna chucking the ball to him, and he's got Andy Reid calling the plays for him. So phenomenal for Xavier Worthy, and obviously Rice and Hollywood take a hit. I don't know how much Rice is hurt by this because he's more of an underneath guy, but definitely Hollywood is hurt by this.
I remember in a previous episode that we did when you were talking about Worthy and how he can be prone to drop some passes. And at the time I was saying, oh, well, then he should end up with Kansas City because he can join the team where everyone drops passes. But it seems like he actually did end up there. Let's talk about Ricky Pearsall going to San Francisco and how this affects, no trade yet on the Brandon Ayuk front, but we'll see. Do you think that might affect that? I mean, could be interesting.
Let me add one more thing on Xavier Worthy before I get into Pearsall. I had said, like, I don't know how it affects Rashee Rice, but I want to say that I think it does affect Rashee Rice negatively because I think Worthy's going to be used a lot like how they wanted to use Hardman, just like on reverses, on shallow crosses, on screens as well. So I think they're gonna get a lot of targets to him, not only deep targets but also around the line of scrimmage. So I think Rashee Rice is negatively impacted as well. Okay, now moving on to Pearsall. It's very curious because they didn't move, Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk yet. I expect they're probably going to move one of them, but if they don't, I think Pearsall immediately steps in as a slot guy, and I'm not super high on Pearsall, but I know a lot of guys are. He runs good routes and he's pretty dangerous from the slot. So I think he's going to be a slot receiver for San Francisco. I don't know. Maybe that affects Kittle negatively. I'm not sure. Kittle comes and goes in various games. Some games he has, a lot of big gains. Some games he disappears. And I kind of expect the same for Pearsall. Like, I feel like maybe he could be used significantly in some games and then other games maybe not so much. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't love the landing spot for Pearsall right now. Maybe if they move on from one of the receivers, I'll feel differently. But right now, I don't love it. I was very, very surprised by that pick. That was another big wow moment for me. I did not expect Pearsall to go this high.
Yeah. The first reaction for me when I saw that, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like, are they not going to trade Ayuk? Because the one theory is that you trade Ayuk for a late first and, you save money. And also because you just paid Deebo. But then the other trade thought could be that, well, you sign Ayuk, you're spending a lot of money this season, but then after next season, when Deebo's guaranteed money disappears, then you just let him walk. And I guess Pearsall would become his replacement instead. So you kind of, bite the bullet for this season. But could that be a case? We'll have to wait and see. One more receiver taken in the first round, Xavier Legette to Carolina. How do you like the landing spot for him, and how much does that help out Young?
Yeah, I mean, phenomenal for Bryce Young to get another weapon. And Legette is an interesting one because he's really high risk in my mind. Like, the draft capital is awesome. He could hit, he could smash, and he's got the upside of like a DK Metcalf. He's a physical player, really fast, got good hands. So there's a lot of upside there, but then he doesn't have a huge amount of production before his last college season, and there's some bust potential too. So it's a risky pick, but because he's getting this high draft capital, he's going to move up draft boards now, and phenomenal for Bryce Young, and good for Legette as well. Like, he's going to move up draft boards now. He's going to be probably a high second round pick in fantasy drafts and rookie drafts. So I mean, I like it a lot for Bryce Young. I like it for Legette as well. I can't wait to see how that shakes out.
Then how does that affect Deontay Johnson, do you think?
I don't think it.
Does
I
it
think it
matter?
probably. I would say it probably even like positively affects Deontay Johnson because they're two different player types, and I think Legette's going to be used more on the outs. Almost exclusively on the outside, whereas Deontay is going to be like running a lot of crossers and a lot of shallower routes. So I think it could help Deontay in taking away some coverage from him and giving him more one-on-one looks. So I like it a lot for Bryce Young. I like it for. I don't think it affects Deontay too much. And Legette's going to get a lot of looks as well on the outside and a lot of various types of plays drawn up for him. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Okay, those were pretty much all the skill players that were taken in the first round. However, I think one of the takeaways of the first round is actually the lack of a wide receiver taken for Buffalo, because that seemed to be their most obvious glaring need. They didn't take one yet. You would think that they'll take one at is it pick 33 that they have early in the second round. But how do you feel the fact that Buffalo has not taken a wide receiver yet?
I mean, yeah, it sucks for right now because we can't talk about it, but it depends who they take. Like, if they were to sit there at 33 and take like Adonai Mitchell or Lad McConkey, I think it's going to be great for fantasy. Like, those guys will shoot up. Now, if they go somewhere else and go defense or something like that, and then wait till the back end of round two to take a receiver, which I think is a possibility, it's going to suck for fantasy because that's a prime landing spot. For day two, the interesting thing to watch for me is going to be if a running back gets taken, especially to Dallas, and then if Bills take a receiver at 33. So these two picks could shoot up into round one of fantasy drafts, of rookie drafts. So I'm going to be watching for that tomorrow.
Now, I can't do it for you. The inches we need are everywhere around us. What are you gonna do? Like! 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 Subscribe! 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 Subscribe!
Vaz, when we look at day one as a whole, is there anything else that you took away from this other than what we've talked about so far?
I think my biggest takeaway is, of course, at 8 that Atlanta took Penix. Like, that was a huge surprise. Also, that the Chargers bypassed Neighbors for a tackle, and then finally that Pearsall Leggett went at the back end of round one. That was a massive surprise for me. Those were the biggest shockers. 7 receivers going in the first round, and then those two early decisions in the draft. How about for you, Jason?
I think for me, honestly, I was waiting to see the Brandon Ayuk trade, and the fact that Buffalo did not pick a wide receiver and Ayuk did not get traded yet. I was a little bit, I don't know if I should say surprised, but I was kind of, anticipating something like that, and it hasn't come yet. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how day two opened up, is perhaps with an Ayuk trade, because I think that's still a possibility, especially with Pearsall going to San Francisco. You never know just yet. But yeah, I think obviously everyone was surprised by the Penix trade, Penix pick as well at number 8. And yeah, still trying to figure out just why. It's one thing when a pick happens that surprise you, but it's another when you can't figure out the reasoning behind it as well. And reportedly, Kirk Cousins was surprised by that as well. He didn't really understand it. His agent was saying stuff about that as well. So we'll see how that turns out. Anyways, that is going to wrap up this video. Please like the video, share it, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you're up to date when we post up our next videos regarding the first round of the draft, as well as our other videos for day 2 and day 3 as well. Otherwise, thank you once again for joining us on another edition of Fantasy Football Freaks.